We look around the world and we see evil people, and we wonder, why isn't God doing anything about that? Join us today as we work through Psalm 52, where we will learn that God actually does deal with evil people. All right, good morning. Welcome to our Psalm series. Glad you are with us today. Today we will be working through Psalm 52, and today's lesson actually could be right out of a movie. So let's kind of look at the characters in the story. First we have David, okay? In our last lesson we saw David was king and he had an affair with Bathsheba. But this psalm today was written before David actually became king. This was written at a time when he was on the run for his life. He had just been warned by his friend Jonathan, who just happened to be the king's son, King Saul's son. He was a friend of David's, but his dad, Saul, wanted to kill David. He was jealous of him, and King Saul was kind of crazy. So the problem was that anyone that was on David's side became a part of Saul's hit list. So you have all these dynamics with the king and his son is best friends with the guy he hates and all that. Then we will meet a man by the name of Ahimelech. And he's a good guy, okay? He served as a Jewish priest in a town called Nob. And then we have a bad guy. A story is never, right unless we have a good guy and a bad guy. This is your bad guy. His name is Doeg. And he's the chief shepherd of King Saul, who wants to kill David. So let's look at 1 Samuel 21, verse 1. It says, David went to Nob and to Ahimelech, the priest, good guy. Ahimelech trembled when he met him and asked, "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" Now remember, David's on the run for his life. Things could have turned out completely different if David had just trusted God. God had told him he would be the next king. David should have stood his ground, believed God would have protected him, but he didn't. And instead, he became terrified. He took off running for his life, and he went to Nob. And then he lies to Ahimelech. David answered him in verse 2 and said, David answered Ahimelech the priest and said, "The king charged me with a certain matter and said to me, 'No one is to know anything about your mission and your instructions. As for my men, I have told them to meet me at a certain place.'" Now, of course, that was a lie. That actually wasn't true. David was running from King Saul. Verse 3, "Now then, what do you have on hand?" David's hungry. "Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever you can find." But here's the problem we see in verse 7. Now one of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, boo, bad guy, the Edomite, Saul's head shepherd. So he sees David at Nob. Now, Doeg, a little while later, is with King Saul. Saul has got his men around him and he's whining and he's feeling sorry for himself. Nobody loves me. Nobody will tell me where David is. So Doeg speaks up. He wants to garner favor with the king. He wants to get on his good side, and he doesn't care who he's going to hurt. He just is looking out for himself. Verse 9, "But Doeg, the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, 'I saw the son of Jesse, David, come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath, the Philistine.'" And Saul is furious because remember, anyone who is for David, Saul is against, and Saul wants to kill. So verse 11 says, "Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and his father's whole family, who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Saul said, 'Listen now, son of Ahitub.' 'Yes, my lord,' he answered. Saul said to him, 'Why have you conspired against me?'" Everything was about Saul. "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, David, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me, as he does today?" Ahimelech is like, "What? Like, what's wrong with you, Saul? Like, first, that's not the story that David told me, but David is the best guy that you know. Like, he's the best guy to have on your team. even your son knows that. Verse 14, Ahimelech answered the king, who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard, and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair. He's like, hey, Saul, the beef you have with David, that's your thing. Like, I'm a priest. My job as a priest is to help anyone in need, and David came to me and he was in need. I didn't know he was running from you. He didn't say that. Verse 16, but the king said, you will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your father's whole family. I mean, this is how evil Saul was. Then the king ordered the guards at his side, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me. But the king's officials were not willing to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Like, there was actually some that were on Saul's, in Saul's camp that were willing to do the right thing. They're like, yeah, no way, we're not going to do that. But Doeg, boo, Doeg, different story. He wanted the accolades of Saul. He wanted a promotion. He wanted Saul on his side. Verse 18, the king then ordered Doeg, you turn and strike down the priests. Doeg was willing to do that. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. Doeg kills 85 priests. Verse 19, he also put the sword to Nob, the town of the priest, with its men and women, its children and infants, and its cattle, donkeys, and sheep. I mean, this is a slaughter. Like Doeg slaughtered all of these people. So with that background, David writes this in Psalm 52. For the director of music, a maskil of David, when Doeg the Edomite had gone to Saul and told him, David has gone to the house of Ahimelech. So in this psalm, it's like David is calling out Doeg. And it's a reminder to us about people living for themselves without any regard for God. Verse 1 says this, why do you boast of evil, you mighty man? Why do you boast all day long? Basically, he's saying to Doeg, what is wrong with you? You're so smug. You're convinced that you're so smart. Like, he knew where David was, and yet he didn't run to Saul. He just kind of waited, manipulated the situation until Saul needed information. So because of that, Doeg's pretty proud of himself. Derek Kidner writes, the real point is the man's self-satisfaction. He thinks himself clever. He is absorbed in his own intrigues. This would be how Doeg feels about himself, but look at how God sees him. He goes on to say, you who are a disgrace in the eyes of God. Doeg is a disgrace to God. See, we can feel like we're kind of all that, and yet in God's eyes, he's like, yeah, you really aren't that great. Okay. Verse 2, your tongue plots destruction. It's like a sharpened razor, you who practice deceit. Think of what Doeg's tongue destroyed. 85 priests, wives, children. And it's a reminder us that what we say, like what Doeg said to Saul, has a powerful effect for good and bad. What we say, our words, what comes out of our mouth has a powerful effect on the people around us. And the one thing that Doeg said, like, oh, I saw David at Nob, destroyed an entire town. In England during World War II, a war poster designed to warn the unwitting disclosure of troop movements displayed this on the sign: loose talk costs lives. And that is so true spiritually as well. Words matter. On March 28, 1979, the nuclear reactor on 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania experienced a partial meltdown. To date, it's been the most serious accident in the United States commercial nuclear power plant, in operating history. The potentially catastrophic event began with a relatively minor little electrical or mechanical failure. And that's what started this whole thing. And this relatively minor incident led to the reactor core meltdown, and it could have been deadly. But I want you to think about that. One small little thing created an almost catastrophic event. And words do that. Think about the divorces that happened because of words, friendships ending, families destroyed, countries going to war, all because of words. One word can destroy so much, which is a reminder that we kind of need to be really careful before we actually talk. David goes on to say this in verse 3, you love evil rather than good, falsehood rather than speaking the truth. Think of the evil inside of someone to murder 85 men and their families. Think of the fact that David was a good guy. That was the truth of the matter. Ahimelech stood up to Saul with the truth of David, but Doeg would rather believe Saul's lies about him. Verse 4, you love every harmful word, oh you deceitful tongue. But God wants us to know what happens to people like this. Look at verse 5, surely God will bring you down to everlasting ruin. God will destroy Doeg. Doeg thinks he's riding all high and mighty because, he's got Saul's favor, but it doesn't work that way. Because this earth is not all there is. We know that. There is an eternity waiting for Doeg that he will go to everlasting, forever destruction. He goes on to say in verse 5, he will snatch you up and tear you from your tent. Now, this could possibly mean that since Doeg had destroyed these families, that he and his families would be expunged from Israel. He goes on to say he will uproot you from the land of the living. God is kind of done with Doeg. Not just done on this earth, but really for all eternity. Verse 6 says this, the righteous will see and fear. They will laugh at him, saying, here now is the man who did not make God his stronghold, but trusted in his great wealth and grew strong by destroying others. In other words, I love this because the people who love God would shake their heads and laugh at Doeg. Like, are you kidding? Like, you actually trusted King Saul? Like, ha ha ha, that's kind of funny. Serious, Doeg? You seriously thought that by destroying all the priests that you're going to flourish? Like, why would you think that? Are you that kind of dumb that you didn't make God your stronghold? David goes on to say this in verse 8, but I am like an olive tree, which is what we have behind us. All these big, beautiful olive tree flourishing in the house of God. I trust in God's unfailing love forever and ever. David's life was flourishing. He was like an olive tree. David was like this healthy tree behind me. The roots are deep. The leaves are nice and green, which contrasts to what Doeg looks like, which is this. No roots. Nothing was there. He's just taken down by a storm, dead forever. And that's just kind of a great picture to ask ourselves, which tree do I look more like? Am I spending time getting to know God, reading my Bible, wanting to know him better, finding myself digging my spiritual roots deeper and deeper so I'm trusting God more, depending on him more? Or do I care more about just like making a name for myself? Or, because that would be Doeg, or are my roots so deep that I just want to promote God? Because this psalm is a contrast between someone who wants power and fame here and now versus someone who really does care about the things of God that will last for all eternity. David ends this and says in verse 9, I will praise you forever for what you have done. In your name I will hope, for your name is good. I will praise you in the presence of your saints. Praise. Doeg was an awful man. He did awful things, okay? But God's heavy hand of judgment would be on him. He's not going to get any kind of praise from God at all. But for David, he loved God. His hope was in God. And David wants to shout that news to everyone that he knows. Here's the deal. Bad people will not get away with it. It may look like it for a while on this earth, but eternity is forever. So let's dig our spiritual roots down so deep so that we can withstand anything that comes in our life. And let's not worry about evil people, because God promises that he will take care of them. I hope that helps you today. Have a really good day.